Hi everyone. As a continuation of the lecture series commemorating the International Day for the Person with the Disabilities, we now have Professor Dr. Curtis Baxstrom. Professor Baxstrom is graduated from Pacific University Medical School in 1984. He completed his master's in reading from Seattle Pacific University. He is an advisory board member and past president of Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association. He is a fellow of College of Optometrists in Vision Development, American Academy of Optometry, and Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association. He has given many lectures worldwide on visual development, reading, dyslexia, head trauma, amblyopia, strabismus, etc. He is currently practicing at Northwest Vision and the Learning Center. Now, he will be taking us through the topic of vision stimulation therapy and beyond, the multidisciplinary approach to care of the visually impaired. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this morning. Basically, what we're going to be taking a look at is CVI, cortical visual impairment, and trying to look at it from how an optometric perspective may add some pieces into the multidisciplinary approach of these children who are developmentally delayed. First of all, just remember that causes of blindness, cortical visual impairment is one of many different types of cases, and therefore differential diagnosis is very critical for them. Important considerations also about CVI is if we were able to determine the time of the brain insult, the stage of brain development, the location of the insult, the severity of the account, all these factors, that would be helpful for us. But unfortunately, one of the pieces that comes into play is that a lot of this information we do not know and has not been documented through an MRI or a CT scan. Now, definitions, I think, become very important. Typically, CVI is meant to be cortical visual impairment. In Europe, though, however, they use the term cerebral visual impairment. And over on the East Coast of the States now, some children's hospitals are using what's called NVI, neurological visual impairment. Out of these, I would say that NVI seems to be the most appropriate term. Why is that? Well, basically because when you have cortical visual impairment, most people believe it's just a visual acuity issue. However, we also know that it has to deal with visual motor disturbances, like moving your eyes, being able to fix and locate objects in space. Also, spatial disturbances that are located possibly in the dorsal pathways. And these are the child having difficulty localizing an object, the judgment of direction and motion, those types of aspects. And then lastly, visual perceptual disturbances. Be able to see, recall from memory objects, be able to discriminate shapes and things like that. So visual considerations is quite broad, really. And that's why the term NVI seems to be very appropriate. Lawrence McDonald, optometrist, says, eyes don't tell people what to see, people tell eyes what to look for. What we're really suggesting here is that the brain is really the bottom line aspect that we need to take a look at, not just eyeballs themselves. So 3 networks, dorsal pathway, ventral pathway. Many of us understand these. The dorsal pathway is how I act upon things in my world, picking up a cup of coffee or anything like that. The ventral pathway is more about recognition. The last one, though, is also called the mirror pathway, which seems to be also important in that I may not be able to do a motor task like walking a walking rail. However, if I watch someone, my mirror pathway fires, and those pathways are fired, may help me then learn. So there's many different pathways that are involved in these areas. Again, here's the dorsal tract and ventral tract. Typically, most people consider most vision as just the yellow pathway into the inferior temporal and localization, not rather localization, but rather the naming of objects. But how we act on things in space is really critical. Some other things to remind ourselves is that with brain injury patients, we talk about peripersonal and extrapersonal space. Space that I know inside my arm's reach is different than beyond my reach. And that may also play a very important part in this area of CVI. Similarly, just like with head injury. Also, ambient and focal pathways. We're talking more about the importance of peripheral vision, let's say for motion, processing, and for balance. But then the focal pathway, more for naming of objects. Last section, real quickly, is that the peripheral information is also processed in the left and right hemispheres. We know language is primarily left, right brain primarily spatial. But when you combine the two, you have a much more powerful ability to deal with your environment. So again, just a quick picture here. Remember, peripersonal space versus extrapersonal space, and then focal and ambient. So during our exams, nothing different than we would normally do, taking a look at all these different aspects. So one thing I would say that is, in the population of infants, do retinoscopy at two different distances. Sometimes infants will notice that their ability to process is up in the near area, about the distance of mom's face, mom's breast, and such. And if you check your retinoscopy out further, let's say 40 centimeters or further out, that child doesn't have a lot of experience in that world, and they may be showing a quite different refractive error than you think. So we, with adults, take a look at far and near retinoscopy. We would do the same thing with infants, doing at least two distances, so we have a comparison. Cardiff cards, visual acuity, these are called preferential looking techniques. Instead of being able to respond, we're looking for any eye movements. And again, this may be motion directed. So eye movement considerations, we want to look at fixation, motion processing through OKN, pursuits, saccades, vergence. Key is we want to find out what eye movements abilities they do have. Secondarily, too, a lot of these CVI patients may also have visual field loss, a hemianopsia or quadranopsia from a stroke in utero, possibly. But also you can have visual neglect or unilateral spatial inattention. So this doesn't have to be a true loss, could be an attentional issue. We also have some problems with overlapping diagnostic entities. There is a condition called DVM, delayed visual maturation, in which our patients may be acting just like a CVI patient. However, around 12 months of age, suddenly they start developing more efficiently. So that's a kind of a mixed bag there. Kids that are on the spectrum for autism, loss of central vision from a scotoma, profound mental retardation, and of course, evaluating for amblyopia and strabismus. So again, those are overlapping diagnostic entities you want to pay attention to. But here's the image of the delayed visual maturation. If you notice, this is really quite the same thing as a CVI diagnosis. You're looking at all cortex and those issues, but also remember brainstem function too. So visual characteristics of CVI, you've got variable level of vision loss, which means what? You have some children that are very significantly, some that are less significantly involved. Fluctuations on the environment can be an important piece. I can be in a room with all the lights on, the child might be overwhelmed and they're shutting down. But if I go ahead and turn all the lights out and have a single light source, they may attend to that target much easier. So a lot of this has to do probably with sustained attention to targets, not just can I see that, can the child see them or not. Also, a lot of times you have to have more patience because there's a delay. You may hold a target up and the child is there, and then all of a sudden you see an eye movement and they make a fixation. Improve visual function in familiar settings too, where if they're at home, maybe they're processing a much easier than if they come to my office and they have a brand new environment they have to become used to. The key for most of these CVI patients is not only when you're doing visual acuity, the quantitative aspects, but more the qualitative aspects of how they get to the target and look for it. There's also a preference for looking at lights versus objects, preference for viewing objects in strange angles and such. Remember that if I'm overwhelmed with my visual stimuli, if I turn my head away, I reduce a lot of the environment and I may be able to pick up the target easier. And also better vision with moving targets. That's the big key. Generally, most of these patients, we find that if we can get them to be paying attention to motion, then we get them oriented to the targets. So again, this is not just a purely visual acuity level, but it's also visual performance. So common interventions, we're going to take a look at high contrast lighted activities and moving targets. We're going to add touch and sound to the target if possible. We're going to look at simple versus complex presentations. We're going to also bring in targets from the right side, left side, up and down, looking for any types of observations of the child making contact with the target. We're going to modify the target size, the color, the environmental background colors. And again, remember, you just need extra patience and time with these patients. So here's just an example of a patient who was having difficulty looking at all. What we found was that if we turned the lights out in the room and put a glow board up, what happens is you put the pen into their hand. Now they actually see that something's going on, with involvement of their hand. And now they can start making contact with the targets much easier. So again, lighted boards are often used for these types of patients as well. Now, our interventions, remember we have visual guidance, which means basically making sure that the target is seeable for the patient. So we're going to modify the lighting in the background and such. We're going to use lenses because lenses provide many different aspects. We're going to use a prism, possibly yoke prism or Peli prisms for visual field loss. We can also do selective occlusion, which is called like often binasal occlusion. And this can often improve your VEPs and therefore your amplitude signals of the VEPs can be improved. Vision therapy and also vision rehabilitation. Sherrington share spatial perceptions are no means purely visual, but are rather visual, muscular, and labyrinthine, talking about motor and vestibular system all the ways throughout this task. And that's again why we're looking at the multidisciplinary aspect. So our guidance, we want to make sure that our compensatory strategies that we noted earlier, but what else might one try? Remember, working in and out of space, beyond arm's length, back into that. Figure ground relationships, small targets, lit targets versus the background. Sometimes we'll also have brimmed hats as well for these patients. One thing we just mentioned here also is infant and toddler massage, again, bringing the PTOT into play, also with vestibular input too. A lot of times vestibular input will help arousal and allow these patients to see. Linear stimulation can be calming. Rotational stimulatory. So very commonly, if we have an upset child, we'll do linear stimulation vestibularly, or if they're not paying attention, often add rotational input. So massage, just to leave you a reference here, talking about massage and its importance on visual maturation, but also overall motor development of the child too. And then value of a lens application, we always know that as optometrists, we're going to refract the patients. But there's some other aspects. If you take a low plus lens, plus 50, and put it in front, generally you'll notice that there's more motion in the periphery. That could help often these patients orient. So here's an example of a child on the left side. He's just looking out in space, not in contact with anything visually. We add low plus and you can see him make eye contact with me with his right eye because emotion's been included in the target for the probably affecting the VR gain, but he's still a left exotrope too, but at least he's now making contact with me and looking. Also localization, being able to reach and touch objects. Here's an example of with and without lenses as well. One other aspect you remember in your clinic, you may have fluorescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting will go ahead and often cause problems with children with developmental issues, especially the CVI kids. Example on the left side, the child's looking down. He may be trying to eliminate the fluorescent light that's bothering him. I hold a folder over the top of his head, and what does he do? He looks back up because he's not overwhelmed now with the fluorescent lighting. So modifying your environment and the lighting is very important. Here's an example of a binasal occlusion. Again, changes in the VEP. An example of this particular patient who showed a 30% increase in amplitudes of VEP with the binasal occlusion. Just quickly, here's one of Kafrida's articles published in Brain Injury talking about this. This is not directly CVI, but we can think about CVI as a possible type of brain injury. So interventions in summary, we have visual guidance, modifying light, target size, those factors, change lenses, change prism, selective occlusion like binasals, and vision therapy. The key is each patient has specific visual needs, and we need to treat with a combination. So for an overview again of CVI, more involved than just simply visual acuity, we got to go beyond that model. And we have to make sure the importance of multiple visual pathways, the dorsal and ventral pathways. And then when we talk about working with these patients, we want to look at occupational therapy, PT, speech, looking at visual motor disturbances, spatial disturbances, and perceptual. The key is looking at the basic development of the subcortical and cortical pathways to help achieve maximum independence. The key is teamwork. That's for us. And so here's a few references for you at the end. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you and hope the meeting goes well. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking us through that wonderful lecture of the multidisciplinary approach. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again, sir. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. All right. You enjoy the rest of the afternoon. What time is it there?
It is 8:20.